All right. Three, two, one. Sana, welcome to South Asian Stories. We're so excited to have you.
I'm so excited to be here. Thank you so much for having me on.
We are on a Friday morning, and we were just talking. Sana just came out from the outside where it was cold outside. We had some tough weather 2 weeks ago here in Texas, but we are through it, and we're excited to chat all things about Sana's life. How she grew up, and where she is today. So let's start way at the beginning, Sana. And can you tell us a little bit about your childhood? What was it like growing up, and how South Asian was your family?
Absolutely. That's a great question. So I grew up abroad. I grew up in Pakistan and I was around 7 when I came to California. So I very much consider myself a bit of two worlds, Californian and Pakistani. Californian specifically because, our country is so diverse. So definitely a West Coaster here. And my family was very progressive, I want to say. So I'm the oldest of three. I have a younger sister. She's 3 years younger, and a brother who's 10 years younger. And my dad went to school at Davis in Sac State. He's an engineer. And my mom got her math degree at the University of Punjab. So she was a kind of a math connoisseur, but she loves education. She's been in education her whole life. So we grew up in California, suburbs of California, Northern California. We actually grew up in an extended family system. So my parents are very progressive in the sense of really wanting their kids to flourish. But we definitely had our Pakistani anchor of, respect and values and basiness through and through. So I grew up speaking Urdu, and we really didn't speak English much in the house. And my grandmother lived with us, my paternal uncle and aunt, and the five of us. So definitely like hum sat sat hai California version,
Love it, love it.
uh, but yeah, but it was different, right? Like we grew up in Northern California, but we were Desi and we were immigrants. So growing up, you're still trying to figure yourself out. Definitely had an accent, definitely was socially awkward, like all the what makes us who we are in our pre-teenage years. So I feel very privileged for my childhood. It was very safe, very secure, and very grateful to kind of get the core of family, authenticity, and love, like to kind of give you the confidence to be who you are.
Yeah, very cool. Um, I think it's really interesting that growing up in Pakistan, moving to the States, did you struggle at all, Sana, with identity of like, am I Pakistani? Am I American? Am I Pakistani American? How did you develop that as you grew up?
Oh my gosh, Samir, that's like my life story. Like, am I Desi? Am I American? Am I Californian? I'm,
Yeah,
trying to figure out who you are, I think is such a journey.
yep,
And I think that journey was really catapulted. I went to UC Berkeley for my undergrad, and that was kind of the first time I saw people that looked like me. And so my initial thought process was, we're all Desi, we're all Pakistani Americans. Most of my colleagues and friends grew up in the Silicon Valley. So I was like, we have these anchors that connect us, that give us like camaraderie, but there's so much differences within our community, right? Like in college, everyone's trying to figure themselves out, and there's a spectrum, right? Like there's folks who, love to party, and I'm an old lady internally, so that never was my thing. And then there are people who really get into faith and culture, and then do all of our like Desi dances, right? Getting into Bollywood.
yep,
So I think for me, it's definitely been a journey trying to figure out where I fit in. And I think as gotten older, I've stopped trying to fit in. I think at this point, I don't even associate myself as being too Desi or too American. I'm just Sana, and friends of mine who accept that part of me are my family. And I think that as you grow older, you stop becoming so apologetic, right? I think
right.
also in our culture, it's so much like, we don't want to get too much noise around us. Like we want to make sure we follow the cultural expectations of, respect and follow through. And I think that uh, we kind of, as like the older millennial, Desi generation, have to carve out what our identity looks like now,
Yeah,
especially for us who are like first and second generation.
that's exactly right. And I think as you get older, the focus on that becomes more apparent. Like as you get inputs from your friends and their experiences, like you get input from your classmates who have different experiences, non-Desi, non-Asian, African American, and it's like I feel my identity has become more into focus the more I get older, and I want to talk about like when you were growing up. The other part of identity for us South Asians is career, and like you see what your parents do, would see what people in your community do. Did you did you know what you wanted to do growing up, and how did that change as you got older? Because I was looking at your background. Yeah, I feel you have the more degrees than like my whole family combined. Like how did you determine what you wanted to do?
Well, that's actually very kind of you. I think I'm on the firm belief, very undesi of me, that your degrees don't matter actually. Like it's really, you could be so street smart without any degrees. So,
Totally. Yep.
and so I think for me, I grew up in a really affluent neighborhood in Northern California. So um, people just had a lot of wealth. And in California style, I guess, the wealth was very evident. Like people had nice cars, big houses. And so for me, growing up and seeing that, I felt like it was something I could reach. So from the very beginning, I knew I wanted to be successful. Like that was something that's embedded in the core of who I am.
Yeah.
And I think as I've gotten older, my barometers of what that success looks like has changed. So when I was younger, it was really just about the bottom line, like the money, right?
Got it.
Like
Got it.
what is the income, what is the wealth, and I think so much in desi culture, right, like that is such a huge value add, like where you are socially. And I think we can have a conversation as to like how toxic that can be, but that
Yeah.
that is part of our culture, right? What is his background,
Right.
you know?
Right. Right. Right.
So very important with your bio data, like there's layers to that.
Yeah.
And I think from the very beginning, my dad, he was like a huge proponent of education. We came to America for education. So when I was younger, my dad used to be like, you're going to Harvard. Like it was just such a normal, like, let's eat breakfast. How are you? Sana's going to Harvard. Like that was just a part and parcel of
Sure.
my career. And I think
Sure.
also when I was younger, like these are the memories I remember. Like I was 8 years old and my dad used to have me like read his emails, and he's in IT, mind you. So he's also a learned guy, but I'm having the confidence like, oh, I'm 8 years old and I can be an editor. So I think it's like a combination of different factors there. But I'm in education, so I am not a doctor in the traditional sense, right? Like I'm a
Correct.
PhD, but I'm not an MD or a PharmD.
Yeah.
And I am not an engineer and I'm not a lawyer. So I think that for me, as I was growing up, I was really trying to navigate like, yes, for me, success looks like the metrics that our families tell us, but like, what are areas that I'm super passionate about? And I think that passion is what has led me to education.
That is wonderful. And that is why we love talking to people like you, because the whole point of the podcast is to say, hey, there are other things and there's other people like you out there that people who are in our community just don't see that. And they say, if I can see someone doing that and blazing the trail, I can do that as well. So I just want to say thank you for doing something that you love and helping our community see that it's a viable path and something you're passionate about. So um, I I want to touch a little bit about going back to the journey. So let's say you're a senior in college, right? And your dad's been telling you, "Hey, Harvard or bust." How did you make the decision then of like where to apply? What am I going to do? Knowing that pressure and that expectation was hanging above you.
I think that for many Desi kids, and I would still call myself a kid, right? Like senior in college, you're still a child, still figuring things
Yes.
out, right?
Yeah.
I think for me, I always had this very intense desire and expectation that I had to be something.
Yeah.
And so the pressure was very real, right? Like it wasn't just I was lackadaisically like picking sunflowers and walking over the Golden Gate Bridge. None of that. I was always kind of a hustler. So I was chatting with my college and career coach. I was doing networking events. I was going to a lot of informational interviews, had done applications to go abroad potentially, was maybe thinking of the Peace Corps. So
Wow.
really thinking of like different avenues about how I'm going to get to where I want to get to. And so at that point in time, it was also very difficult because earlier in my college journey, the economic recession had happened. So
Mm-hmm.
a lot of the jobs and a lot of the funding dried up. So here we are, seniors at college trying to figure out our lives, and
Yeah.
opportunities aren't even there. So the anxiety is definitely mounting. I actually learned about Teach for America through someone who referred me. So there was a recruiter at our school at Cal. She was like, so and so referred you to me to kind of have a chat about Teach for America. Will you talk to me for 10 minutes? And
Great.
the 10-minute conversation lasted for an hour. And I was like, this is very interesting. Like, having the opportunity to make an impact on kids' lives who looked like me, who had less opportunities than I did. And the program also allowed core members to get their masters. So you got your masters at Hopkins or UPenn at a prorated rate, which of course was an indicator in my mind. And then you're doing something that's oriented to social justice, making a difference. So it honestly was like the stars aligned and it fell in my lap and I was like, let's do this.
That's awesome. Yeah, Teach for America is just a phenomenal program, and I've had a few friends do it. Tell us about the highlights. Tell us about the even the lowlights of your experience teaching 2 years. What's it like to be an educator at the front lines?
Yeah, it's very difficult. I feel like I really feel in my core the two hardest jobs are mothers and teachers. And fathers are important too. Mothers are the anchor. So it was very difficult. You're 21 years old, right? And you think that you know it all. You have this degree in your hand, right? And you have 21 years of experience under your belt. And here you are going to change the world. And I think it's a very rude awakening because you're often tasked to be in spaces where kids, rightfully so, haven't trusted their educators because they've had such difficult experiences just navigating life. So I went from the Silicon Valley where there's a lot of privilege, a lot of power, right?
Yes. Yeah.
A lot of very specific type of Desi people, like very high in terms of achievement, high in terms of networking, right? Like there's a special type out there, which I love because those are my friends. So, there's no shade there. But going from there to Baltimore, where there has been an insidious entrapment of racism, kids don't have access to healthcare, they don't have access to a safe way of living. Like kids of mine had their friends pass away in front of them because of like the violence, the gunshot,
Mm-hmm.
or
Mm-hmm.
had really negative experiences with police. And those were their real lived experiences. So all of a sudden, here I am, like this chipper 21-year-old from Cal, and they're like, who are you again? And so I think that reckoning is tough because you're then, it's up to you then to either fight or leave, right? Like, and fighting in the sense of like fighting your own beliefs of like, can you do this? And are you willing to learn and be humble? Because you have a very difficult moment where you have to learn to be humble and reflect, like, what are things that you're not good at? And the thing with being a teacher, it's not simply like, you study for a test, you get an A. Like being a teacher really requires you to like connect with your kids, be good at speaking, be good at like thinking strategically in the moment, pivoting, then there's an interruption, then you have to go and do a teachable moment. So you are having constant thoughts in the moment being an educator. So definitely a very difficult job, such a beautiful job because you're changing the lives of kids, but my hat goes out, tips to teachers everywhere. They work really hard for what they do. And I think for me, um, in terms of really kind of the changing point was when I realized like, my narrative was based on what I saw in Pakistan, what I saw in California, and I didn't really see what other experiences of people who are brown and black in the country look like, right? Like I went from a very privileged white enclave in Northern California to a very privileged Desi enclave at Berkeley. And I didn't really know what it meant to be black in America, didn't know what it meant to be Latinx in America. So here I am like face to face, like looking at kids who I may have had biases about, who I may have had misinterpretations about, what I see in the media, what I see in music, and like hearing their stories and like caring about them as people because they were my kids. And so I think
Mm-hmm.
there is a level of just like, wow, it's just more deeper than just me and my bubble. And like, how can I continue to be in a space where kids who don't have a voice and who are so smart, like should get the choices they need to live their lives. And I think that through all the spaces I've been, I've been at Berkeley, I've been at Hopkins, Brandeis, at Harvard. The smartest people I found were in Baltimore City, hands down.
Really? That's great. Wow, that is powerful, Sana. And like, I have so many questions, and I want to start from what you said a little bit before about humility and gaining the humility. Was there any stories that you can remember in your 2 years there that provided you that humility that that was like an eye-opening experience for you?
Oh my gosh, Samir, if you had come to my classroom my first year, there was a class I had right after lunch. And it was lunch, so kids were getting a little bit more, like let's have a little bit more energy now, right?
Yeah, yeah.
It was a class of 35 kids. The capacity was 25. So here we are, 11th graders and some 12th graders, English class with Miss Naeem, because that was my maiden name at the time. And the class was just chaos. And I just attribute that to myself and my teaching. So at Berkeley, how we learned, right, was we had a lecturer, right, a professor, very smart, come on stage. There's these massive classes, 300, 400, 500 kids. And we just sit and we just take notes and we just kind of like fangirl over how smart our professors are and, how just amazing and smart we're becoming. So I was like, I'm going to take the tools that I've learned, like what I saw at Cal, go to Baltimore City, do my classrooms the exact same way, and my kids are just going to fall in love with me. And that was not the case. Check. That was definitely not the case.
Yeah.
They were just like, Miss Naeem, like, you're boring. And I was really offended because
You're like, I'm shocked. Come on.
I am shocked. Like, how can you say that I'm boring? And I think that's just, maybe I was, quite frankly, maybe I was, because that was not how the kids felt engaged. That was not an engaging way. So my journey over the 2 years in Baltimore was like, what do I need to do to be an engaging teacher? And engagement requires activities. It requires like connecting with topics that are interesting for the kids, getting to know their stories. Who are they as people, right? Like, what do they like to eat? Where do they go for fun? And constantly being at all the basketball games. Basketball was a huge sport at our school, and just being there outside of the 8 to 4 to see that they, like, Miss Name does other things. She doesn't live in her classroom the whole day. And that was like a huge pill of humility that I had to definitely swallow, because you are completely recrafting and recalibrating who you think you are as a person, right?
Yeah.
So I think it's so interesting because now we're having all these conversations about what does student-centered learning mean? What does culturally responsive teaching and equity mean and diversity mean? And I think ultimately in a classroom at the end of the day, you have to listen to the kids. You have to listen to their parents and their families. And you have to listen when they're giving you feedback. You can't just say that, oh, because I have so-and-so friend or so-and-so degree, I know more. And I think that those lessons of humility have like carried me throughout my life. Like, I don't know, even for you, like what you think is a value add, right? Maybe for Daisy's in California at that time, a degree was, or wealth or status, maybe that was what it was. But people are moved through different things. So if you figure out what moves people and you can reflect in that audience, like you can really do anything.
Yeah. Wow. That is, I can just imagine you, in that classroom, be like, "Wow, I need to change things." Like after that, so, from where you started to where you went, how did you feel you changed the most in that experience, both personally and professionally?
I think I take a pause before I assume. I
Got
think
it.
so many of us, right? Like we look at someone who is, they see in their 30s with glasses. Samir, I'm not talking about you, but just in general, like you see someone, you make constant judgments about what you think their story is, right? I
Hmm.
look at you, I'm going to assume what you need based on how you look like. And I think that's really dangerous. And maybe when you're 21 years old and figuring out the world, you're leaning onto those ways of looking at the world, like the heuristics or the stereotypes. But if you continue to do that, like you're going to have a really difficult life, because people's stories are so unique and powerful, and you get to know so much just by asking them.
Yeah.
So, for me, like how I connect with people is learning their stories, like asking their why, asking what their thoughts are, but feeling and being engaged. But if you step back and you just assume, then that just shows that you're like disengaged and not interested. And so I think that that was a really big lesson in my life, like not to assume people and their intent or their stories, and always push myself to navigate those conversations by being like, who are you? Like, tell me about yourself.
Yeah, that is so powerful, and that's honestly, um, again, a genesis of this podcast is stories is in the title, right? Because everyone you meet has a story looks similar and like from the outside, but the inside and their background can be so different. And I think taking the time to ask the questions, like you said, the why, asking the what, where did you come from, tell me about yourself, just bonds people closer. Because you know you hit the nail on the head, is our community can sometimes be very quick to judge on a very base layer of things, you know what they look like, their education, their family background, and boom, they know who the person is. But that's not the case, and it gets even worse when you go outside the community. When you said Latinx, Black communities, it's like the preconceived notions. Sometimes I really struggle with, um, and I'm glad that the more you have these kind of experiences, and the more people like you have your voice heard, the more our community can open up. So that's wonderful. Um, so you're getting to the end of your experience at Teach for America. How did you decide what to do next after that?
I think my life is so much about serendipity, right? I think we think about where we want to be, right? And we think about where we're going to go and how we're going to get there. And like life takes us a completely different route.
Yeah.
So I had a fellowship working with Senator Mike Johnston in Denver. It was supposed to be like a 2 month, 6 to 8 week type of gig, learning about policy, getting people together who are educational leaders, and then them taking their learnings to go back into the classroom. And that was what I was aiming to do. I was like, I'm going to Denver for a few weeks, I'll be back. When I was in Denver, there was a position that opened up within Teach for America to be on staff to help teach and coach core members. And literally the job fell in my lap. I had a friend who was like, you're going to be great at this. You really get energy from coaching and people. And I really think you should look into it. I went and did the job interview. And I got the job the next day. So
Wow.
my plan of moving back to Baltimore never happened. I called my roommate at the time, Netta, who's one of my best friends, and I was just like, "Sorry, Nettie, like I'm going back to Denver now." And I had all my bags. I went back to Baltimore, got all my bags, packed everything, moved to Denver the next week. So
Wow. How
it's
crazy
just
is that?
it was crazy. Like I just think, to our earlier conversations about life, right? Like
Yeah.
there are so many things outside our life that we can't control. And I think we have this feeling or thought process we can control things in our own life too, right? Like if we work hard, the quintessential Desi mentality. If we work hard, if we do the right steps, if we respect our parents, because that is a critical lever, if we do the internships, we'll get the job and we will be successful, eventually get married, have kids, live happily ever after. But so many of the factors in our own life we can't control. Like we think we can, but we can't. So I think that my professional journey has just taken me throughout the country and the world. And in so many moments, I wasn't even looking for a position. It just kind of popped up. I got it. And then that was history.
That hustler mindset still continues from early age. That's awesome.
Oh my gosh, Samir, always, always, always. The hustle
Yeah,
will never end. The
that's right.
grind will never end.
I love that. So talk to me about this. You were an educator on the front lines. You moved to coaching, the front lines as a in your new position. Tell us where you feel education policy is going, because my hypothesis is a lot of people listening hear the word education policy and they're like, that's kind of ethereal. I don't really know exactly what that means. Can you dumb it down? Can you explain to us what your version of is if someone is like, okay, what are you pushing on, and what do you think it's going?
That's a great question. I think that, yeah, that's a great question even now. I feel like for me, what I'm really passionate about in the education space is how are we making equitable outcomes for kids in low income, underprivileged communities. So I'm very much interested in urban education, right?
Yeah.
So COVID has completely shaken up what education looks like. But I think at the end of the day, all kids deserve the right to be in spaces where they're valued, where their voice is heard, and they're just not a name or a number. So education policy is like all encompassing in the sense like what types of curriculum are you teaching these kids? Is there curriculum where people look like them in the curriculum? Are they being taught Black history? Are they being taught Latinx history? Are they being taught by teachers who look like them? Right? Like we need those communities and networks to succeed, and so it's grossly unfair that there's classrooms where there, people who, like how I started, 21, 22 years old, you're a white teacher teaching a group of kids, you don't know how to teach, they're struggling, and then there's like the cycle of poverty and negative outcomes all over again. And so the work that I currently do, I'm the director of school operations. I work at a Title I high school, and I really kind of own all of the systems and structures that make the school efficient. And how are we creating these really transparent, equitable processes to help kids do what they need to do, which is learn, right? And so when I think about like, where do I want to go in the next like 10, 20 years, I really want to be a national thought leader in education about what are we doing policy wise, whether it comes to funding, whether it comes to support, whether it comes to like putting different ideas on the agenda legislatively to really kind of give urban ed students and this space the kind of facelift that it needs to be innovative, rise to the challenge, and help these kids get the education that they deserve.
That is incredible. And I think it's one of those things that it's systemic where if you need to solve the base issues for it to ladder up into like broader change, and it's not something that you can fix in 6 months, but if you pull a platform together, education policy platform, you can have long-term effects for wide swaths of communities like the urban communities that you said. um, so what do you think, like you said you have ideas and things that we can do to change. What are those, and can you share why do you think they'll work?
I think from just a basic level, from folks even who aren't educators, I think I'm making a huge leap of assumption here, but I'm assuming that there's definitely educators who are listening, but who are also like doctors, lawyers, engineers, right? Like different folks who are embedded into education day to day, but really see the value in it. I think for lay people, it's so important to think through how can we maximize impact on people who don't look like us but who need our help, because education is not just a standalone issue. It's not simply like, oh, there's teachers over there teaching those kids in those classrooms, but my children are in a private school, they're not affected. A lot of the systemic problems are all intertwined, like in urban ed, right? There's kids who don't have adequate health access. They
Hmm.
they don't know when their next meal is coming from, where it's coming from. They don't have a community to lean into. Like they don't know how to navigate that. And there's a lot of folks who have the resources or the bandwidth or the ability to kind of come in and work in tandem with the community and the community's needs. I mean, I think ultimately we're really all in this together. We're all kind of impacted by what we're doing in classrooms. Like these kids are our future, like our kids are our future, right? And so
Yeah.
I think that if we really lean into figuring out how we can make an incremental change on our own and how we can partner with communities to help them feel empowered and make decisions that they want, I think is really important. Like I can't speak on behalf of what other people want, but I can have conversations with them, ask them what they need, and ask them how I can help them in the process. And I
Yeah.
feel like a lot of folks who are listening have those resources, have that capability, and really kind of leaning into doing that. I think there's no words that can define how powerful that can be.
Yeah, that's so true. And I think sometimes many people have good intentions that they want to help, but they don't know where to start, or like, what's the tiny step that I can make to help in this space? What would you say to those people, me included, of like, I want to, this space is something I'm passionate about. What do I do as my first step?
I've given so much thought to that, right? Like being Daisy. I think about that all the time.
Yeah,
I think about conversations we have with like our bua, right? Or our
yeah,
titi, right at the dinner table, and it's just oftentimes like I feel like it's like a safe space at the table inside the house, and then there's everything outside,
right,
right?
right.
So I think in those moments, I think we really kind of need to unpack some of our own traumas and difficulties in our culture before we go about trying to figure out how to help others. Because
Mm,
I think to be the best versions of ourselves to help other people, we really need to help hone our own prejudices and challenges to begin with, right? Like, I think that, and I say this with like a lot of love and respect. Like, I will always be Desi American, I'm always Pakistani American, but for our community to get better, we need to realize where we can grow. And there's a lot of cultural baggage that comes with your skin tone and like what that means and like navigating the world like that, or what your status and what that means and navigating the world like that, and just thinking through like how our biases affect how we treat others in our community alone before we go out venturing to change the larger systemic issues in education,
yeah,
right?
yeah, yeah. No, that is so true. Because it reminds me of a quote: is you can't help other people until you help yourself. Like you can't be the best version. You Other people can't get value from you if you're not in a great place or your family's not in a great place. So let's do a role play. You and I are at the dinner table together, over a nice dinner of biryani, and this topic comes up. What would what do you recommend bringing up to my chacha or bua about this that will really get the conversation in a good place? Any advice around that?
I think a really great conversation starter is like, what do you value for your own children?
Okay.
Or if you could go back in time, like what would you change in terms of the type of education you provided to your kids? And I think that when we center the conversation with ourselves being the center, right? And if we center ourselves thinking through like what could we have control over if we could, I think that really kind of speaks to challenges that we could mitigate for future generations.
Hmm.
And I say that because I'm a mother of two small children. I have twins. They're both almost 3.
Congratulations.
Thank you. I mean, it's quiet right now, but our lives are completely chaotic. And I look at them, and I think about how I grew up, and the kind of pressures I had to really be the best or be successful, and those pressures never go away, right? Like they'll always be embedded in our DNA and in our core. So when
Mm-hmm.
sitting after an 18-hour day and I have 15 minutes, I'm like, oh my gosh, am I supposed to be doing something right now? Right. And I think a lot of my colleagues and overachievers attest to that. Like it's a gift and a curse in many ways.
Yeah. Yeah. Yeah.
And I think about like what I want for my own children, like, 18 years from now, like, do I want them to really fixate on success? And my answer would be no. Like, my husband and I have this conversation all the time. Like, my husband is a PharmD MBA, so he actually beats me on the degree front. And we talk about like what are our visions for our children, and it's like we want them to be well adjusted. Like we want them to have empathy for others,
Yes.
them to feel content in who they are. We want them to be happy. And if that happiness makes them want to be an entrepreneur or an artist or a teacher, that's what they're going to be. And they're not going to have a lawyer or a doctor unless they want to, right? Unless that's what
Yeah.
makes them passionate. And I still joke though, because I am Daisy, and I'm like, yes, you can be an entrepreneur, but you need to have a doctorate first. But I joke, that's very tongue in
Yeah.
cheek.
Yeah.
Um, but I think that's like so important, right? Like we're gonna value our kids no matter what they do, and I think that's the American in me. That's
Yeah.
that's definitely where the hybrid identity comes in, because whoever they choose to marry or be with or live their lives, like if they're good people intrinsically, like I will support them.
Yeah.
And I think when we are at the dinner table eating biryani and lamb korma, and a little bit of gajar ka halwa,
Yeah.
like our parents did their absolute best to raise us. They really did. Our families did.
Yeah.
I think I feel very blessed to be Desi because there is a love in our communities that is really beautiful.
Yeah.
But I think that, you can always reflect on what could be better. And when you use that reflection and utilize that lens for education today, I really think that we can transform outcomes for our future kids.
I could not agree more. And it's funny you had that conversation with your husband because my wife and I talk about it too. Is you know we are who we are because of our parents, and right, and they are who they are of their parents. But we don't have to be our parents. Like we can be our own version of ourselves. Like it's whatever I am, whatever my wife's are. It's the hybrid of two, and then we can make those decisions for our kids and our future generations. So like that's powerful to me because the buck can stop with you where if you want to make a change, if you want to make a pivot of how your kids view the world, how they grew up, what sensitivities they have, being empathetic beings, you can make that change, right? And that sometimes people, I think, just give up. Like, oh, this is how it's always is. This is how my family is. And I think that's kind of short-minded. It's myopic, and I love that you're taking that with your own kids. In your core, family unit and how that expands out. And one of the things I want to ask you about, Sana, is optimism and like, you know, how where are you, thinking on the optimistic side, how do you feel about where education policy going, whether in how you approach it with your kids or outside of it, in other communities? What are you optimistic about where things are going?
I think that the recent conversations regarding Black Lives Matter has been really heartening, honestly, because I feel like we're finally kind of at the apex where we're willing to have difficult conversations truly. And I don't think of that like 20 years ago when we were 10 years old or 8 years old. I don't remember those conversations really happening. And I think what makes me optimistic is, we're willing to now see that there's not just one narrative. Like we do, our strength is our diversity, our diversity of thought, what we bring to the table, like who we are as people. That is
Yeah.
truly our strength. And
Yeah.
so I think like thinking of ways in which we value that in our kids is very exciting. Like when people are naming, as white educators, they're like, I understand that our country has been built on things that weren't the best for people of color, but I am so vested in this and I'm going to work with you. I think that's really exciting. And
Yeah.
the only way you're going to grow and change is to be uncomfortable. If you're
Yeah.
comfortable all the time, that just means that you are at status quo. And so I really appreciate moments where I'm faced in my discomfort because then I can be like, okay, why did this make me uncomfortable? And how can I fix the way I'm looking at it or fix the way that I perceiving the situation to kind of dig at that piece a little bit more.
Yeah, that's right. Is like pushing yourself to say, understand, going the why. Like, why am I feeling like this? And can it, and diagnose it to the core issue, and then how can I resolve it, or at least have a conversation about it. That is wonderful. Wow, Sana, this has been great. Let's switch to our rapid fire questions. And again, these are our questions we ask all our audience members, and I'm very, very excited to see what you have to say. So, first question for you: is there an item that you've bought recently, item or service that you've bought recently that has dramatically improved your life?
An Eero, actually.
An
So
Eero.
yeah, it was a recent impulse buy. I'm not the most tech savvy person in the world, but I do know that in remote learning or Zoom calls, you need to have really good Wi-Fi. So
Yes. Yes.
we live in kind of the middle of nowhere. We live in the country in Connecticut. So having strong Wi-Fi is clutch, and we really needed that to survive. So I feel good about that impulse buy. Like we have
Yeah.
strong Wi-Fi signals, and I think it's been really practically helpful the last several weeks.
I 100% agree. It's like everything is now through your internet, so you got to make that as souped up as possible because, you know, who knows when we'll be seeing people, in person. This is the best we can do. Um, that's great. That's a great one. Um, okay, this question is very interesting. When you think of a South Asian person you look up to in your field, who would you say comes to mind and why?
So this is a bit emotional, but the only woman that ever looked like me in education was my professor at Berkeley. Her name was Dr. Kiran Chaudhary, and she was an expert. She was such an interesting Desi woman. She was a hybrid of two different worlds. Grew up in Pakistan, born and raised in Pakistan, actually. Came to America. She actually used to clean bathrooms, then ended up getting her PhD at Harvard, becoming a tenured professor at Berkeley, and that's how our paths crossed. And she was just magical, just kind of like a spitfire, would say exactly what she wanted to say. This is the power of tenure, right? You can say.
Sure, sure.
So yeah, she was really amazing, and she really stands out to me as my hero, so to speak. It's a little emotional in the sense that I emailed her a few months ago, asking her, how she's doing, just kind of giving her a little update on life. And so she never responded, which I thought was odd. So when I looked her up, she actually passed away earlier.
Oh, I'm sorry to hear that.
I was so sorry too. It was just kind of a freak thing. She was very young. She was very, very young, and she passed away from a heart attack. So that kind of moment really kind of froze me a bit because, really taking the time to tell people that they're valued and you love them, I think is just so important. So
Yeah.
that really made me think about.
And it makes you think about the fragility of life, of like, hey, you know, to our earlier point, that you could be so focused on success or your version of success, and boom, things happen that change your life completely in a good way, serendipitous way, like it's happened in your life, or in a way that you may not expect. So I think that is such a sobering reminder of where we are in life, especially with a pandemic going on and what's really important to you. So thank you for sharing that. Before we go to some of the other questions, I think Mira has a question that she wants to ask. I'd love for her to ask it to you.
Hi, I just want to say this interview has been so great to listen into. It's my first time, so I'm like really enjoying this. And everything you said, I've just like really hit home on. But I was wondering, I'm taking a narrative audio class this semester, and so we basically listen to a podcast like every week. And a few weeks ago, we listened. I don't know if you've heard the podcast This American Life. But they did a series on desegregation in schools. And I thought it was really interesting because I didn't even know that problem was even a thing. I don't know, like I assume like, segregation has been over for so long. I didn't still think like that was something common in schools. And I was just wondering if you've done any like policy work on that or have any experience working in that.
Absolutely. That's like a huge issue, actually. It's interesting because when it comes to Connecticut has one of the highest opportunity gaps in the country. So the achievement between Black and Latinx students and white students, you think when you think of Connecticut that it's such a wealthy state.
Mm-hmm.
So much of that wealth is disproportionately in some of the highest monetary zip codes. So all the zip codes close to New York, right? Like there's Fairfield, Darien, Weston, Westport. Not to say that they don't have students of color, but it's disproportionately white. And then go into cities like Hartford or Bridgeport or New Haven, and it's disproportionately Black or brown, and kids aren't succeeding. And so this policy issue is something that I've like really studied and researched over the last decade. Like I've worked in schools who've experienced that. It's kind of like a perfect storm in the worst proverbial sense, because it's just years and years and years of neglect and years of gentrification where, white folks who are wealthy have moved to the suburbs in better schools. And then we look at numbers and then we blame the kids for having low test scores when we don't kind of acknowledge that there's like this history of race that has played a huge component in that. Like it's not just an accident that all of the wealthier affluent suburbs are white and all of the struggling suburb or communities are of color. Like it is a purposeful creation. So Mira, thank you so much for the question and acknowledging that you're learning. I think we all are in many ways, but I think that I guess the best thing to end my answer is nothing in the United States is created by accident. Everything is meant for a reason. So if you're seeing patterns and things that don't seem right, there probably is a reason why those exist.
Got it. That's great. Thank you. That's a wonderful answer. Um, Okay, so these questions are our last few and some of my favorite. Is there a movie or book, Sana, that has had the most impact on you that you can share?
So the book actually that had the most impact on me was The Immortal Life of Henrietta Lacks. Samir, have you ever read it?
I've never read it, but I've heard of it. I've heard of it.
It's powerful. It is a powerful book. It really kind of hit home for me because at the time I read it when I was in Baltimore, and the woman who is the protagonist grew up in Baltimore. So ultimately, this book is really powerful because this woman had cancer, Henrietta, and her cancer cells were utilized for scientific discoveries and studies. And it actually led to amazing scientific innovations and breakthroughs,
Oh, cool.
but like she never was asked, right, like whether her cells could be used. So this entire book chronicles a contemporary lens of one of her family members. I believe it's her daughter, trying to get insight and feedback as to why that happened, and just kind of like searching for clues about her mother. It's just really beautiful and thought provoking, and it just shows you that history is just not in the past, it's like all around us. And it's a really powerful book. I would highly recommend it.
Awesome. Yeah, we will definitely link to that out. Thank you for sharing that. That's great. Okay. Um, so this question I always enjoy hearing people's response because it's so personal. So, what advice would you give an up and coming South Asian person who's listening to this interview, who's interested in education, who may be getting pushback from their parents or their family? What advice would you give them and why?
That's a hard question, right? It's a hard question because the headspace I'm currently at 31 is very different than I was at 21 and
Mm,
in that exact same space. But I think that my advice would be to follow your passion and purpose, but to also know why you're following it. So I think that pushing yourself to think through, like, why do you want to go in education? Where do you see yourself? Like, how are you willing to make a difference? I think are really important questions to reflect on. I do want to add a bit of an addendum earlier, when we were talking about Desi culture and success, right?
mm-hmm.
And I think sometimes we do things because we are told that we will get some sort of joy or catharsis or completion when we get it. I think for me, anecdotally, that was when I was finishing my doctorate. So I spent 24 years in school. I thought all of a sudden I would become a doctor, finish this journey, and feel different all of a sudden. And I felt
Yeah,
the same.
yeah,
There was
yeah.
nothing. Like I just, I'm the same Sana. I'm the same Sana who's awkward. I'm the same Sana, right? I'm the same Sana who likes cupcakes. Like nothing has fundamentally shifted about
Sure,
who I am.
sure.
And so I think that, you know, the kind of circling back to the advice I would give, don't think that anything is going to be more of a completion. Like you are not going to be completed from getting that career that you want in education. I think that you should focus on this as a journey and like constant growth, and thinking through like how it fits into the larger puzzle of who you are as a person.
That's great. Yeah, because I think starting to where we are wrapping up where we started is identity and figuring out how this part is part of your identity and um, hearing your story and other stories and seeing that, hey, this is possible for me, like this is something that I can do and exploring it and I feel what you said about serendipitous moments, like if you put it out into the universe, like it somehow will manifest in itself in the right way. So thank you for sharing that's wonderful. Okay, before we close, any final ask for the audience? Anything you'd like to leave them with?
Yeah, I think that there's one thing that our conversation has made me really think about, and I really want to name for especially younger Daisies going honestly any field. Like the last decade, I've been in research and policy, operations, education, and I think that what our community really should continue focusing on is building relationships with people who are in the space in the field. A lot of this work is relational because all of these serendipitous moments I had was because of a relationship. Like it was a friend, a colleague, a former boss, like, someone who recommended me, who thought about me. And, oftentimes we think, if we work hard, we're going to get X. But sometimes it really is about people capturing your story and bringing it up to life, and we are all connected in so many ways. I know, Samir, you and I are probably connected somehow, because that
Yeah,
is just the nature of the
yeah,
Desi community.
yeah,
So, as we're kind of like hopping off the call and thinking through all of these different pieces, I definitely will push, like, you never know where you're going to be, but so much of it is because of, of course, who you are, your fate, if the stars are aligned, but relationships are key. So make sure that you continue to cultivate them wherever you go.
perfect, perfect. That is incredible way to end this. If people want to learn more, Sana, where can they find you, or how can they get in touch?
Absolutely. I use LinkedIn for my professional kind of
Okay,
correspondences. So if they want to find me there, I'm more than welcome to be a resource or support in any way. So many people have lifted me up in my journey. So if I can support someone, I would be absolutely happy to.
excellent. And we'll put all those links in the post as well. All right, Sana, Dr. Shaikh, thank you so much for everything you do, and making the strides that our community needs, and honestly the country needs in this such an important space. So thank you so much for being on South Asian Stories. We truly appreciate it.
Samir, I just want to take a moment to thank you, because I think that you are doing really great work. Like, I think the fact that you do this, like, you deserve major kudos, because, our voices are super important and you're making it happen. So major kudos right back to you.
Oh, thank you so much. All right, let me